A feared Mafia boss sat across from her and didn't even say hello. His first words were, "Can you cook?" She should have been offended. Instead, she said something that stopped the entire room cold. Something only one person on Earth could have known. Emma Russo had been rejected 4 times. 4 families, 4 meetings, 4 polite smiles followed by a phone call the next morning. She's lovely, but not quite what we had in mind. What they had in mind, apparently, was someone thinner, someone quieter, someone whose laugh didn't fill an entire room and whose opinions didn't arrive before she was invited to share them. Emma knew this because her aunt had whispered it to her mother behind a partially closed door, and partially closed doors had never once stopped sound from traveling. She had cried once, just once. Then she'd made herself a full plate of pasta, eaten every bite standing at the kitchen counter, and decided the next meeting could go straight to hell. And yet here she was, sitting in the back of a black car, dressed in her nicest blue kurta, heading toward a private estate on the edge of the city for meeting number 5. This one was different, her mother had said. This family was serious. What her mother had not said, what nobody had said, not until the car turned through iron gates flanked by men with earpieces, was exactly which family this was. Luca Moretti. The name alone made cab drivers change the subject. It made shopkeepers suddenly find reasons to look at the floor. It was a name that lived in the space between rumor and certainty. A man who supposedly controlled half the port trade in the city, whose lawyers had made 3 separate criminal cases disappear, and who had not attended a single social function in 4 years. Emma sat very still in the back of that car and thought, my mother has completely lost her mind. The dining room was the kind of room that wasn't meant to make you comfortable. Everything in it was too large. The table, the chandelier, the silence. 2 attendants stood near the wall like decorative furniture. A single-place setting waited at each end of the long table, which Emma thought was a rather theatrical way to have a conversation. She had been waiting 11 minutes when he walked in. Luca Moretti was not what she expected. She had imagined someone older, softer around the edges. The kind of dangerous man who hid behind a belly and a cigar. Instead, he was sharp everywhere. Sharp jaw, sharp eyes, a dark suit with no tie. Like he'd dressed for a meeting he didn't fully intend to take seriously. He was younger than she'd assumed. Perhaps 35. Perhaps less. He sat down without greeting her. He poured water into his glass, then looked at the folder on the table, presumably her family's proposal, without opening it. Then he looked at her, not up and down the way the others had, just directly, like he was trying to find something specific. Can you cook? Emma blinked. Out of every question she had prepared for, what are your values? What do you expect from a husband? Do you have any medical history we should know about? This was not one of them. I'm sorry? It's a simple question. He leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. Can you cook? Emma stared at him for exactly 3 seconds. Something shifted in her chest, not offense, not confusion, but a strange tilting recognition, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. That depends, she said slowly, on whether you're the little boy who used to steal bread from my grandmother's kitchen. The room stopped, not figuratively. The attendants near the wall went rigid. The hum of the air conditioning seemed to pause. Luca Moretti, a man who looked like he hadn't been caught off guard in a very long time, went completely still. His glass hovered halfway between the table and his mouth. Excuse me? The words came out quieter than before. Careful now. There was a boy, Emma said. Her voice was steady, though her heart was doing something complicated. I was maybe 10, 11 years old. My grandmother ran a small soup kitchen in Porto Vela, a coastal town. You probably don't know it. Every winter, we left the pantry unlocked. The rules were simple. Take only what you need. Come back if you're hungry. Most children knocked. One never did. She paused. He didn't steal, really. He always took the smallest loaf, the one from the back of the shelf, the day-old bread, like he didn't want to inconvenience anyone. She folded her hands on the table. I saw him once through the kitchen window. Skinny boy, dark hair. He was hiding a piece inside his jacket, and next to him was a little girl smaller than him. He broke the bread in half and gave her the bigger piece. The silence that followed was a different kind than before. Luca set his glass down, very carefully. Nobody knows about Porto Vela, he said. It wasn't an accusation, it was something closer to a confession. I know, Emma said. That's why I'm telling you. For a long moment he just looked at her. This man newspapers described as untouchable, immovable, feared, and something moved across his face that his lawyers and loyal soldiers had probably never once seen. He looked, just for a moment, like that boy again, the one hiding a loaf under his jacket in the snow. He cleared his throat, picked up the folder she'd been waiting for him to open, set it back down without reading a single word. You lived in Porto Vela, he said, until I was 14. Then my grandmother passed and we moved to the city. The soup kitchen. He said it like he was testing the weight of the words. It closed the winter after I. He stopped. The winter after you, Emma finished quietly, was the hardest one. But it didn't close. Not until spring. Something crossed his face. A question he wasn't ready to ask out loud yet. Emma didn't push. She simply reached into her bag and placed a small, folded photograph on the table between them. Old, faded at the corners. A group of children outside a low stone building. A hand-painted sign above the door. And in the far corner of the frame, barely visible, half turned away, a thin boy with dark hair, one hand tucked inside his jacket. Luca didn't touch the photograph. He just looked at it for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to something she hadn't heard from him yet. Unguarded, rough at the edges. That kitchen fed my sister for an entire winter. Emma nodded once. I know, she said softly. I remember the little girl. The chandelier light was the same. The room was the same. But everything else in it had quietly, irrevocably changed. Luca Moretti looked at Emma Russo, really looked. For the first time since he'd walked through that door, and for the life of him could not remember why he'd thought this meeting wasn't worth taking seriously. Luca Moretti did not sleep that night. He sat in his study until 3 in the morning, the photograph on the desk in front of him, a glass of whiskey untouched beside it. He had looked at that image so many times in the past few hours that he could close his eyes and see every detail. The stone building, the painted sign, the children crowded near the door, and in the corner that boy, him. He had spent 20 years building walls around that winter, not because it was shameful, though poverty had felt that way once when he was young enough to confuse hunger with failure, but because remembering it meant remembering everything that came after. The sister he'd lost, the promises he hadn't kept, the version of himself that existed before he'd learned that the world only respected one language. Now a woman had walked into his dining room and spoken that language anyway. Not the language of fear. The language of bread left on a back shelf, of a pantry door left unlocked on purpose. He picked up his phone and called Marco, his most trusted man. Porto Vela, he said, when Marco answered on the second ring. I need everything. Church records, school records, anyone still living there who remembers a soup kitchen on the eastern side of town. The woman who ran it, her name was Russo. Start tonight. Marco didn't ask why. That was why Luca trusted him. By the time Luca's car crossed into Porto Vela 2 days later, Marco had already done the work. A folder sat on the back seat, photographs, names, photocopied registry pages from the old coastal parish. Luca didn't open it during the drive. He wanted to see the town first, before someone else's notes told him what to think about it. Porto Vela was smaller than memory had made it. That was always the way with childhood places. The streets that had once felt like a maze were just narrow lanes between old buildings, the sea visible at the end of nearly every one of them. The smell was the same, though, salt and fish and wood smoke, and that smell did something to his chest that no amount of expensive whiskey ever had. He walked without his usual security detail, just Marco at a distance watching. The soup kitchen was still standing barely. The sign above the door was gone, the paint on the walls peeled back to bare stone, the windows covered in boards. But the building itself was intact. He stood outside it for longer than he'd planned. Then he found the neighbors. An old woman named Carmela, who had lived across the lane for 50 years, remembered the Russo family with the kind of warmth people usually reserved for saints. She spoke about Emma's grandmother, Nonna Rosa, she called her, with tears she didn't bother wiping away. Described a woman who had sold her own furniture one winter to keep the kitchen stocked, who had taken in children nobody else wanted to look at, who had, in the hardest February anyone in Porto Vela could remember, sent her young granddaughter door to door through the snow to make sure every family on the eastern side had something hot to eat. Emma was maybe 11, Carmela said, folding her hands in her lap. 12 perhaps, small girl, very serious eyes. She made that soup herself. Her grandmother taught her, delivered it in a cart, would not go home until every pot was empty. Luca kept his expression neutral. It was a skill he'd perfected over years. Inside, something was quietly dismantling itself. From the church records, he learned something else. Something Emma had not told him, perhaps because she didn't think it mattered, or perhaps because she was not the kind of person who kept score. In the January of that brutal winter, the soup kitchen had nearly shut down. Supplies had run out. The church had withdrawn its small, monthly contribution because the new priest believed charity bred dependency. Nonna Rosa had been 3 days away from closing the doors. She hadn't closed them. The registry showed a private donation, small by most standards, significant by Porto Vela standards, recorded under the name E. Russo, personal property. A cross-reference in a jeweler's ledger that Marco had somehow tracked down showed a transaction on the same date. A pair of gold earrings, a small bracelet, a ring, Emma's grandmother's jewelry, sold by a 12-year-old girl without telling anyone. Luca sat in the car after that and said nothing for a very long time. Marco, who had worked for him for 11 years and knew better than to fill silence that wasn't his to fill, stared out the window and waited. She kept the kitchen open, Luca finally said. Not to Marco, not really to anyone. That kitchen had fed his sister through the worst of it, had kept her alive long enough for spring to arrive. He had always known someone was responsible for that, had always carried a vague, wordless gratitude toward whatever force had made it possible. It had been a 12-year-old girl selling her grandmother's jewelry in secret. He thought about Emma sitting across that long table from him, the way she'd folded her hands, the steadiness in her eyes. 4 families had decided she was not enough. Luca looked out at the gray sea and thought those 4 families had been the luckiest men alive, because they had walked away before they could be shown how completely wrong they were. He pulled out his phone. "Set up another meeting," he told Marco. "Don't make it formal. She won't like formal." He came to Porto Vela looking for confirmation. He left carrying something heavier. The knowledge that the person who had saved his family wasn't a saint or a stranger. She was just a girl who decided that kindness was worth the cost. And he had spent 15 years not knowing her name. Emma had not expected a second meeting. After the first one, she had gone home, changed out of her blue kurta, and given herself a very firm talking to in the bathroom mirror. He is a dangerous man. The meeting was strange. The coincidence was interesting. That is all it was. She had then made tea, called her friend Petra to report that meeting number 5 had been, quote, the most confusing 40 minutes of my adult life, and gone to bed. She had not thought about the way his voice changed when she mentioned the little girl. She had absolutely not thought about that. So when Marco called her personal number 3 days later, she still had no idea how he'd gotten it, and said that Mr. Moretti would like to meet again, somewhere she was comfortable. Her choice of location, no formalities. She stood in her kitchen holding her phone and stared at the wall for a solid 10 seconds. She named a small cafe 2 streets from her apartment, somewhere with plastic chairs and very good coffee and absolutely no chandeliers. Luca arrived alone. No Marco, no earpiece, no dark suit. Just dark trousers and a simple shirt, sleeves folded to the elbow. He looked almost ordinary. Almost. He sat down, looked at the plastic chair briefly, and said nothing about it. You went to Portovella, Emma said. Before he could speak, he looked up. How did you know? Carmela called my mother. Carmela calls my mother about everything. A well-dressed stranger asking questions about Nonna Rosa was not going to go unnoticed. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. What were you looking for? Confirmation. Of what? That you were telling the truth. Emma nodded slowly. She wasn't offended. A man like Luca Moretti hadn't survived this long by taking people at their word. And you undersold it, he said quietly. The jewelry. You didn't mention that part. She looked at him carefully. It wasn't my story to make impressive. It was my grandmother's kitchen. I just helped. You were 12. 12-year-olds are capable of quite a lot when they have a reason. She shrugged, and then because she couldn't help it. Also, Nonna Rosa would have been furious if she'd known. She had very strong opinions about accepting help, even from family. Especially from family, actually. Something shit at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. She sounds difficult, he said. She was magnificent, Emma replied. Difficult and magnificent are often the same thing. This time he did smile, small and brief, like it surprised him, like it was something his face had partially forgotten how to do. It was after that second coffee that Emma went home and did something she hadn't planned to do. She started going through the old boxes. There were 3 of them, stacked at the top of her wardrobe. Cardboard, slightly soft with age, full of the things that hadn't been important enough to unpack when she'd moved but too important to throw away. Letters, school photographs, her grandmother's recipes written in a handwriting so small it required a reading lamp. She had been meaning to go through them for 2 years. She found the photograph in the second box, tucked inside an old church bulletin. It was larger than the one she'd already shown Luca. A proper photograph, not a snapshot, taken by someone with an actual camera at what appeared to be some kind of winter gathering outside the soup kitchen. She recognized the faces near the front. Carmela, younger, the priest who had come before the difficult one. 3 women she couldn't name. She almost set it aside. Then she looked at the far left edge of the frame. 2 figures, slightly apart from the group. A teenage boy, older than she remembered him. So it must have been a later winter, standing with one hand on the shoulder of a small girl beside him. The girl was looking at the camera. The boy was not. He was looking at the girl, with the focused attention of someone who is counting something, making sure it is still there. Emma brought the photograph closer to the lamp on her desk. The boy's face was turned just enough. Her stomach dropped. It wasn't the child she'd glimpsed through the kitchen window years ago. He had grown by this photograph, maybe 15, 16, but the jaw was the same, the dark hair, and the expression, that watchful, contained expression. She had seen it 3 days ago across a table with a chandelier overhead. She sat down on the edge of her bed and looked at the photograph for a long time. In all the years she'd thought about the boy who never knocked, she had wondered what became of him. Whether the winters got easier, whether the little girl had stayed healthy, she had never once considered that the answer would arrive in the form of a meeting she'd almost canceled, organized by a mother she'd been mildly furious with for weeks. She called Petra. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to not be dramatic about it." Petra was immediately dramatic about it. But that night, alone after the call ended, Emma looked at the photograph again. The boy watching over the girl, the soup kitchen door open behind them, the winter light flat and gray, and felt something settle in her chest. Not romance, not yet. Just the specific ache of recognizing that some people enter your life twice. And the second time, they arrive as someone completely different, and somehow, impossibly, still the same. She brought the photograph to their next meeting and set it on the table without a word. Luca looked at it, and this time, his eyes didn't move away for a very long time. "That's her," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "That's my sister." Emma nodded gently. "I know," she said, "and Luca, I don't think she's gone." The word dead had never come from an official source. That was the thing Luca realized. Sitting across from Emma in that small cafe, the photograph between them on the table. In all the years he had carried his sister's absence like a stone in his chest, he had never actually seen a death certificate. No grave, no record, just a social worker's verbal confirmation delivered to a 15-year-old boy in a government hallway, and the particular cruelty of bureaucracy that offers no room for follow-up questions. He had been 15. He had believed what he was told. "Walk me through it," Emma said. Her voice was careful, the way you speak to someone standing near an edge. What exactly happened to her? Luca was quiet for a moment. This was not a story he told, ever, to anyone. But Emma had sold her grandmother's jewelry at 12 years old to feed strangers, and she had kept that secret for 20 years, without once using it as a reason to feel important. He figured she had earned the truth. Her name was Julia, he said. She was 7 that last winter in Porto Vela. Our mother had already been gone 2 years by then. She got sick, and the hospital sent her home because we couldn't pay. After that, it was just the 2 of us. He turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. That spring, after the kitchen closed, I tried to find work. I was 15, I had no papers, nothing. A man offered me a job moving cargo at the docks. I was gone 3 days. He stopped. When I came back, a neighbor told me the state had come. Someone had reported 2 unsupervised children. Julia had been taken. And the social worker told you she died, Emma said. She said there had been a placement, that the child had been ill during transit, that she didn't survive. He said it flatly, the way people say things they have rehearsed into numbness. I had no money for a lawyer, no family to help me fight it. I was 15 and I believed her. Emma looked at him steadily. What if she lied? The question sat between them like a lit match. Why would she lie? I don't know yet, Emma said, but look at this. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her bag. She had come prepared, which told Luca she had not slept much either, and smoothed it on the table. After you left yesterday, I started digging. I still have contacts in Porto Vela, people who knew Nana Rosa, people who worked with the church. I called in every favor I had. She tapped the paper. This is a partial record from the Regional Foster Placement Office. It took 3 calls to get it because apparently their archive system is held together with hope and old rubber bands. But look at the date. Luca looked. A placement record. A female child, age 7, transferred from coastal Porto Vela to a northern care facility in the spring. The name on the record had been partially redacted. Standard procedure, Emma explained, for minor protection. But the details underneath were not. Date of birth, physical description, a small identifying note, Child presented with a locket, silver, engraved with the letter G. Refused to surrender it upon intake. Luca read that line 3 times. His mother had given Julia that locket. He had forgotten about it entirely until this moment. And now the memory arrived with a force that made him press his back teeth together. Silver. Small. The letter G engraved on the front in his mother's careful handwriting, because she had done it herself with a borrowed tool. She was alive, he said. She was alive, Emma confirmed, and placed into foster care, not a grave. The social worker either made a mistake or she didn't make a mistake. His voice had gone very quiet. The dangerous kind of quiet. Emma was learning. Someone paid her or pressured her. I was already getting involved with people at the docks by then. People who would have preferred I had nothing left to go home to. Emma felt the cold logic of that settle over her. A 15-year-old boy with no family ties was considerably easier to control than one with a sister to protect and a reason to say no. Then Julia is out there somewhere, Emma said. She'd be 22 now. He said it like he was hearing it for the first time. Like 22 was an impossible number for someone he'd last seen at 7, thin and serious, clutching half a loaf of bread. The placement record shows a transfer north, Emma said. The facility it names, I looked it up this morning. It closed 8 years ago, but its records were absorbed by a hospital archive in the city. She paused. I have a contact there. A woman who owes my cousin a very significant favor involving a lost wedding ring and a very bad best man. I can make a call. Despite everything, Luca almost smiled. You have a contact at a hospital archive. I have contacts everywhere, Emma said simply. I grew up in a soup kitchen. You learn very quickly that every person knows something useful. He looked at her across the table. This woman 4 families had dismissed as too ordinary and felt something close to disbelief. Make the call, he said. Emma was already reaching for her phone. Julia Moretti had not died on a cold morning in spring. She had simply been made to disappear, quietly, efficiently, by people who understood that a boy with nothing to lose was a boy they could use. But 22 years had passed, and somewhere in the north, a young woman was living a life she had built from nothing, carrying a silver locket she had refused to give up even as a child. She had no idea that her brother had spent 15 years believing she was dead. She had no idea he was coming. The hospital archive contact came through in 4 days. Emma's cousin's favor, whatever complicated social debt it involved, turned out to be worth considerably more than either of them had anticipated. The woman at the archive, a soft-spoken records manager named Daria, didn't just confirm the placement. She pulled the full transfer chain. 3 facilities in 7 years, each one further north than the last, each one a different name on the intake form. The way the system quietly reshuffled children it didn't know what to do with. The final record showed a discharge at age 18. Standard procedure. The state's obligation ended there. A forwarding address had been requested but not provided. The last known location was a small town in the north called Selvaggio. Population just over 2,000, the kind of place that didn't appear on most maps unless you were specifically looking for it. It wasn't much, but it was a direction. Emma delivered all of this to Luca over the phone, efficiently and without drama, and he listened without interrupting once, which she was beginning to understand was his version of being impressed. Selvaggio, he repeated. It's a start, Emma said. It's more than I've had in 15 years. There was a pause on the line. Not uncomfortable, just the kind of pause that happens when 2 people are both thinking the same thing and neither wants to say it first. I'll have Marco verify the discharge records, Luca said finally. And Emma. Another pause, shorter this time. Thank you. She almost made a joke. She stopped herself. Don't thank me yet, she said. Find her first. What neither of them noticed, because they were too focused on the north, on Julia, on a trail that had been cold for 2 decades, was that someone had already started watching them. The charity gala was Luca's lawyer's idea, a fundraiser for a children's hospital, the kind of event that powerful people attended to remind the city they were also generous people. Luca hated these things. He went anyway, once a year, because the hospital had saved the life of a boy who worked for him, and Luca had a long memory for debts. This year, his lawyer suggested he bring someone. "It looks better," the lawyer said, with the careful tone of a man who had survived 11 years in Luca's employment, by choosing his words with surgical precision. "You've been seen alone at too many public events. People are starting to ask questions. Let them ask. The questions aren't about your social life," the lawyer said. "They're about your stability. Rivals read isolation as vulnerability. It would simply help, strategically, to present a different picture." Luca thought about Emma in a plastic chair, talking about her grandmother like she was describing a force of nature. He thought about how she had arrived at their second meeting already holding information he hadn't asked her to find. He called her that evening. She said yes, which surprised him slightly. Then she said, "I'll need to know what I'm walking into," which didn't surprise him at all. She wore green, not the careful, understated green of someone trying not to be noticed, but a deep, confident green that made the room's beige and black look exhausted by comparison. She walked in beside Luca without holding his arm. She stood next to him, which was a different thing entirely, and several people in that room registered the distinction even if they couldn't have explained why. Luca watched people watch her. It was an interesting exercise. She was warm with the hospital director, genuinely interested in the fundraiser numbers. She asked the caterer a question about one of the appetizers and ended up in a 4-minute conversation about regional olive oil that made the caterer look happier than anyone else in the building. She did not perform. She did not shrink. What Luca didn't tell her, what he registered from across the room with the specific tension of someone trained to read rooms, was that 2 men near the east wall had been watching her since the moment they arrived, not with the casual interest of strangers, with the focused, cataloging attention of people building a file. He recognized one of them, Enzo Caruso, a lieutenant in the Caruso family operation, rivals whose relationship with Luca had been a cold, careful truce for 3 years. The kind of truce that required both sides to believe the other had nothing worth targeting. Luca kept his expression neutral and filed it away. On the drive home, Emma kicked off her heels in the back seat and said, "The man by the east wall, the one in the gray suit. He was photographing us." Luca looked at her. "You noticed." "I noticed things," she said simply. "Who is he?" "A problem," Luca said. "Not yet, but soon." Emma was quiet for a moment, looking out the window. Then, "They're going to use me against you, aren't they?" It wasn't a question. He answered it anyway. "They'll try." She turned from the window and looked at him directly, and there was nothing frightened in her expression. Nothing that asked him to protect her, or reassure her, or soften the truth. "Then we should probably find Julia," she said, "before they figure out she exists too." Luca looked at this woman, who 4 families had called too ordinary, and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not attraction, not yet. Something quieter and more dangerous than that. He felt, for the first time in years, that he was not entirely alone. The Caruso family had spent 3 years waiting for Luca Moretti to make a mistake. They had always assumed it would be a business error, a bad deal, a moment of greed. They had never once considered that his vulnerability would arrive in a green dress, carrying a photograph and a soup kitchen story. But that was the thing about enemies. They always looked for weapons in the obvious places. And the most powerful things rarely announced themselves. The lead came from an unexpected place. Marco had been quietly running searches through northern employment registries, the kind of slow, unglamorous work that produced results in weeks rather than days. What he found wasn't Julia's name. It was a pattern. A young woman matching her approximate age had worked briefly at a textile cooperative in Selvaggio 3 years ago. The cooperative's records listed her under a different surname, Ferraro, but the physical description matched. And more importantly, one of the cooperative's vendors had a forwarding address for her in Florence. "It could be nothing," Marco said, setting the file on Luca's desk. "It could be everything," Luca replied. He told Emma that evening. She was at her kitchen table when he called, apparently grading something. She tutored children in the afternoons, he had recently learned, which surprised him until he thought about it for approximately 4 seconds and realized it was the least surprising thing about her. "Florence," she repeated. "When? End of the week. I want to verify the address before we move on it." A brief pause. "I'm coming. Emma, I speak fluent Italian. I know how to ask questions without sounding like I'm asking questions, and I grew up in a soup kitchen, which means I can have a conversation with absolutely anyone without making them feel interrogated." Another pause. "Can your people say the same?" He thought about Marco, who had the conversational warmth of a filing cabinet. "End of the week," he said. "Pack light." Florence in October was beautiful in the way that beautiful cities are always slightly inconvenient. Too many people stopping in the middle of narrow streets to look upward, too many shadows that shifted with the afternoon light and made everything feel slightly cinematic. Emma stood at the window of their hotel and looked out at the rooftops and tried to feel like a person who did this kind of thing regularly. She mostly succeeded. Luca had booked 2 rooms on the same floor, which she hadn't asked him about, and he hadn't explained. She appreciated both things. The address Marco had found led to a narrow building near the Oltrarno district, residential, 4 floors, the kind of place where people kept their doors slightly open in the afternoons, and the smell of someone's dinner reached the stairwell 2 hours before it was ready. Emma liked it immediately. The plan was simple. She would go to the door alone, less threatening, more approachable, while Luca waited around the corner with Marco. If the woman answered, Emma would introduce herself as an old acquaintance from the cooperative. Buy enough time to confirm the identification, and then they would decide the next step carefully. It was a good plan. It lasted until they turned onto the street, and Emma noticed the door to the building was already open, not ajar, open fully, the way doors are left when someone has gone through them in a hurry. She stopped walking. Luca, he had already seen it. His hand was on her arm before she finished saying his name, pulling her gently back toward the wall of the adjacent building. Marco materialized from somewhere to Luca's left, which Emma was beginning to understand was simply something Marco did. "The flower shop," Luca said quietly. "Across the street. Go in. Don't come out until I come for you." That's not the plan. The plan changed 30 seconds ago. But Emma was looking at the open door, and at the narrow alley that ran alongside the building, and at something else. A dark car parked badly at the alley entrance, one wheel on the curb, the engine still warm. She could see the heat rising faintly off the bonnet. "They're not inside," she said. "They were here and they left. That car, it's facing out. Whoever came here came fast and left faster." She turned to Luca. "They didn't find what they were looking for, which means whoever lives here was warned." Marco checked the car quickly, empty, no plates, and confirmed it. Luca looked at Emma with an expression she couldn't fully read. "The cooperative," she said, already thinking forward. "They traced the same lead we did, but they got here first, which means our search has a leak somewhere." She kept her voice low and even. "And if Julia was warned, she didn't go far. She went somewhere she knew, somewhere she felt safe. You don't know that. She kept a silver locket through 7 years of foster care, Emma said. She doesn't let go of things that matter. She's not running, she's hiding. There's a difference. She looked at him steadily. People hide near water, or near somewhere that feels like home. Does Salvaggio have a lake? A river? Luca stared at her. A river, he said slowly. The Arno runs east back toward. Then we go east, Emma said. Quietly, no cars that can be followed. They moved. No discussion, no hesitation. Emma kept pace with Luca through streets she didn't know, reading the city by instinct. The quieter lanes, the routes without cameras, the way you navigated somewhere unfamiliar when you'd spent a childhood learning that the direct path wasn't always the safe one. At one point, Luca glanced sideways at her. "You're not frightened," he said. I'm absolutely frightened," Emma replied, without breaking stride. "I'm just also useful. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive." Something shifted in his expression then, not the almost smile she'd seen before, but something deeper and less guarded. Something that looked very much like recognition. Like he was seeing, for the first time, not the woman from the meeting or the woman from the photograph or even the woman from the cafe. Just Emma, as she actually was. They had walked into Florence looking for a missing sister. They had found instead confirmation of something neither had wanted to say out loud, that the Caruso family was one step behind them, and that whoever had leaked their search had access to information that only a very small number of people held. The trap had been meant to frighten them. Instead, it had done something far more dangerous to Luca Moretti. It had shown him, beyond any remaining doubt, that Emma Russo was exactly who he had suspected she was, and he was running out of reasons to keep that thought at a careful distance. The river led them to a vineyard. It took most of the afternoon, following the Arno east on foot and by local bus, Emma asking careful questions at 2 small villages along the way with the easy, unhurried manner of someone inquiring about directions rather than a missing person. At the second village, an elderly man outside a tobacco shop mentioned a young woman who had recently taken work at a family estate nearby. "Quiet girl," he said, kept to herself. "Good with the vines." He said it the way people in small places mention the newcomers they've quietly decided to accept. The estate was modest by vineyard standards, a stone farmhouse, a long slope of late-season vines going amber in the October light, a dog asleep near the gate, who opened one eye at their arrival, and then apparently decided they weren't worth the effort. Emma found this reassuring. Dangerous places rarely had dogs that relaxed. A woman answered the main door, mid-50s, flower on her hands, the no-nonsense expression of someone who fed a household and ran a business and had limited patience for unexpected visitors. Emma smiled. "I'm sorry to disturb you. We're looking for a young woman named Sofia Ferraro. We have some information that may be important to her. We're not here to cause any difficulty. We just need 5 minutes." The woman looked at Emma, then at Luca, then back at Emma. "Wait here," she said, and closed the door. Luca looked at Emma. Sofia. She changed her name at some point. Ferraro was probably a foster family surname. Emma kept her voice low. "Don't push when she comes out. If she comes out, let her set the pace. You're telling me how to meet my sister. I'm telling you how to not lose her in the first 30 seconds. She said it gently but without apology. "She doesn't know you. She knows a name that probably came with complicated feelings. Give her room." He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded once. Sofia Ferraro was 22 years old and she had Luca's eyes. Not similar, identical. The same dark, direct quality. The same slight downward angle at the outer corners that made both of them look at rest, like they were privately evaluating something. Emma saw it the moment the young woman came around the side of the farmhouse, wiping her hands on her work trousers, her expression carefully neutral, in the way of someone who had learned early that neutrality was the safest opening position. She stopped a few feet away and looked at Luca. Something moved across her face, fast, and then gone. "You found me," she said. Not a question, not warm, just a statement, delivered to the ground between them rather than to his face. "Sophia," Luca began. "My name has been Sophia for 12 years. I'd like to keep it." She looked up then, and her jaw was set with a stubbornness that was so precisely his that Emma had to look away briefly. "How did you find me?" "Records and Emma." He glanced sideways. Emma has been helping me look." Sophia's eyes moved to Emma, assessed her quickly, the way people do when they've spent years reading strangers for safety. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy something, because her shoulders dropped a fraction. "You should come inside," Sophia said. "Before anyone on the road sees a car they don't recognize sitting at the gate." The farmhouse kitchen was warm and smelled like bread, which Emma chose not to mention, though the particular irony of it sat quietly in her chest. The estate owner left them alone without being asked. Emma liked her more with every passing minute. Sophia set 3 cups of coffee on the table and sat with her hands wrapped around hers, and Luca sat across from her, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Emma sat to the side and said nothing, because this was not her silence to fill. It was Sophia who broke it. "I remembered you," she said to her cup, "for years. I used to describe you to the other children in the home. My brother, he has dark hair, he'll come. He always knows where I am." A short pause. "Then I stopped saying it. It was easier. I was told you died." Luca's voice was controlled, but only barely. "I believed it for 15 years. I know." She looked up. "I found out 3 years ago. I hired someone to look into my own records. I found the social worker's report, the false one." Her eyes were dry, but her knuckles were white around the coffee cup. "I didn't come to find you because I didn't know if you'd want. I didn't know what your life looked like." "It looked empty," Luca said, "in the places that mattered." Sophia looked at him for a long time. Then she reached into the collar of her shirt and pulled out a chain. At the end of it, small and silver and worn smooth with years of handling, a locket. The letter G engraved on the front in careful, loving handwriting. She had kept it through everything. 7 foster placements. 12 years of building a life from nothing. She had kept it the way you keep the one thing that proves you were loved before the world got complicated. Luca made a sound that Emma had never heard from him. Short and involuntary, like something long held finally releasing. Emma quietly stood, refilled all 3 cups, and gave them the only thing they actually needed: time. Sophia had survived everything by becoming someone who needed nothing. She had built her walls the same way her brother had built his, quietly, efficiently, 1 year at a time. She had not planned on letting anyone through them, but she had also not planned on a stranger who smelled faintly of olive oil, sitting in a vineyard kitchen and refilling her coffee without making it mean anything. Emma Russo had a particular talent for that, for being present without being a pressure. Sophia, who had spent 22 years reading people for threat, recognized it for what it was: safety. And it had been a very long time since anywhere had felt like that. The leak came from inside. Luca found out on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after Florence, when Marco placed a single sheet of paper on his desk without a word and stood back. It was a phone record. Calls made from a number registered to one of Luca's junior operations managers, a man named Pietro, who had worked for the organization for 2 years, who had been present in the room when the Selvaggio lead was first discussed, and who had apparently decided that the Caruso family's money was more persuasive than his employer's reputation for remembering betrayal. Luca looked at the paper for a long time. "Where is he now?" he asked. Office downstairs, Marco said. He doesn't know we know. Leave him there. Luca folded the paper once and set it aside. I need to think. Marco left. Luca sat. This was the part where 3 years ago, he would have made a different decision. A faster one. The kind of decision that sent a message so clearly nobody needed it translated. He had built everything he had on the understanding that certain lines could not be crossed without consequence, and Pietro had crossed one. But he thought about Emma's voice on the phone from Florence. People hide near water. And he thought about Sophia's hands around a coffee cup. And he thought about a 12-year-old girl selling jewelry in secret because the direct solution was also the right one. He picked up his phone and called Emma. The Carusos have been making a mistake, he said when she answered. They think pressure produces panic. They've been operating on that assumption for 3 years. And you want to change the assumption, Emma said. She'd clearly been awake for a while. Her voice had the alert, slightly impatient quality it got when she'd already been thinking about something he hadn't told her yet. They kidnapped someone last night, he paused. A man named Aldo. He ran the original Soup Kitchen Building's neighborhood association. He's 71 years old, and he once chased a car thief down the street with a broom, which tells you most of what you need to know about him. A sharp silence. Is he hurt? No, they're using him as leverage. They want me to walk away from a port contract dispute that's been in arbitration for 8 months. They believe taking someone connected to my... He stopped. Connected to Porto Vela will destabilize me. They know about Porto Vela. Pietro told them, not everything. Enough. He heard her exhale slowly, not with fear, with the specific controlled frustration of someone recalibrating a plan. So they expect you to come at them hard, she said. Abandon the arbitration, make it personal, do something that gives them justification to escalate. That's what they're waiting for. Then don't. Her voice was calm and utterly certain. Luca, you have been building a legitimate case against the Carusos in that arbitration for 8 months. Port Authority records financial irregularities, 3 witnesses who've already given statements. You walk away from that now, and you hand them everything. A brief pause. What does your lawyer actually have on them? Enough to end the arbitration in our favor, possibly enough for a fraud referral. And the witnesses, are they protected? 2 of them, yes. The third is nervous. Speak to the third one yourself, not through Marco, you. She said it with quiet firmness. People stay nervous when they're talking to intermediaries. They hold when they're talking to the person who actually has something to lose alongside them. He hadn't considered that. He sat with it for a moment. Aldo, he said. How do we get him out without giving the Carusos what they want? You don't negotiate with them at all, Emma said. You go above them. The arbitration evidence, the financial irregularities, how much of that touches their legitimate business partners, the ones who don't know the full picture? Significantly. Then those partners need to know what they're exposed to. Today, not next week. The moment the Carusos' legitimate side starts getting calls from worried investors and business partners, holding a 71-year-old man becomes a liability rather than an asset. She paused. They took Aldo to gain leverage. Show them it works in reverse. The second holding him costs more than releasing him, they'll let him go. The silence that followed was long but not empty. Luca was running the logic forward, checking it from different angles the way he always did, looking for the place it broke. It didn't break. You understand, he said slowly, that what you're describing requires trusting the process. Lawyers, evidence, institutional pressure, things that take longer than what you're used to, Emma finished. Yes, I know. And you think it works. I think it's the only version of this that doesn't cost you something you can't get back. Her voice was quiet but without hesitation. You have a sister now, Luca. You have something worth protecting that isn't made of fear. Don't solve this the old way." He closed his eyes briefly. She was right. He had known she was right before he called her. That was why he had called her. The next 72 hours were precise and deliberate. Luca met personally with the nervous witness. Marco delivered documentation packages to 6 of the Caruso's key business partners simultaneously. Luca's lawyer filed an emergency motion in the arbitration citing evidence of bad faith conduct. By Thursday morning, Aldo was released outside his own front door with a phone in his hand and no explanation offered. He called Luca immediately. They looked frightened, Aldo said, with considerable satisfaction. "Good," Luca said. That evening he sat in his car outside Emma's apartment building for 10 minutes before going up, not because he was uncertain, because he understood for the first time in a long time that he was about to say something that couldn't be unsaid. She opened the door before he knocked, which meant she'd seen him from the window, which meant she'd been watching for him. Neither of them mentioned it. "You were right," he said. "It worked." Emma leaned against the doorframe. "I know." "I don't say that easily. I know that too." He looked at her, this woman who had arrived at a formal meeting, and turned it into the most important conversation of his life, and said the thing he'd been circling for weeks. "I don't want to do any of this without you." Emma was quiet for a moment. "That's not a proposal," she said carefully. "No," he agreed. "It's something that comes before one. I wanted to say it correctly first." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. "You'd better come in then," she said. "I'll make coffee." The Caruso family had spent 3 years looking for Luca Moretti's weakness. They had found Emma Russo and concluded she was it. They had been precisely, completely wrong. She was not his weakness. She was the first person in 15 years who had made him want to be stronger. Not for power, not for survival, but for something worth actually building. The boy who had stolen bread to feed his sister had spent 2 decades becoming a man the world feared. It had taken one woman, one photograph, and one impossible coincidence to show him what he'd actually been hungry for all along. 6 months passed quietly. Quietly for Luca Moretti meant no crises before breakfast. It meant the port arbitration concluded in his favor. In December, the Caruso family's fraud referral, moving through official channels with the slow, grinding certainty of a process that nobody could buy their way out of this time. It meant Pietro faced consequences through a courtroom rather than a dark road, which was Luca's first deliberate choice of that kind and not, he had decided, his last. It meant Sofia came to the city in January, just for a weekend, she said. She stayed 3 weeks. She and Emma had spoken on the phone twice before that visit. By the end of the first evening together, they were at Emma's kitchen table arguing cheerfully about the correct way to make ribollita, which Emma maintained was a flexible recipe, and Sofia maintained was absolutely not. Luca sat at the end of the table and said nothing, and felt something in his chest that he didn't immediately have a word for. He found the word later. It was home, not a place. A configuration of people. The idea for the building came from Sofia, which surprised everyone, including Sofia. She had asked during that January visit what had happened to the soup kitchen in Porto Vela. Emma told her it was still standing, barely, empty since Nana Rosa died, the deed sitting in a lawyer's office attached to Emma's family estate. Nobody had touched it in years because nobody had known what to do with it. And grief had a way of making decisions feel permanent. "It shouldn't stay empty," Sofia said simply. She said it the way she said most things, without drama, as a statement of obvious fact. Places like that don't belong to one family. They belong to everyone who needed them. Emma looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Luca. He was already looking back. The restoration took 4 months. Emma managed it with the same energy she brought to everything, thoroughly, warmly, and with a complete refusal to accept the contractor's first timeline, which she described as optimistic to the point of fiction. She hired locally. She used the original building's stone where it could be saved, and matched it carefully where it couldn't. She found photographs of the original interior in Carmela's collection and used them as reference, so the restored kitchen looked the way it had looked when Nana Rosa ran it, with the same long prep counter and the same wide window above the sink that let in the afternoon sea light. Carmela supervised the paint color personally and was extremely particular about it. Luca funded all of it without discussion, which Emma tried to argue about once and then stopped, because he gave her the look he reserved for negotiations. He had already concluded internally, and she had learned in 6 months to recognize that look and choose her battles. She did, however, insist on one thing. The sign above the door would carry Nana Rosa's name, not the Moretti name, not a corporate donor's name, just Rosa's Kitchen, Est, 1998. Still open. Luca agreed without hesitation. She had expected a discussion. The absence of one told her more than a discussion would have. The reopening was on a Saturday in late April, when the coastal light was at its best and the town had the particular warmth of a place that has decided to celebrate something. Most of Porto Vela came. Carmela arrived an hour early and stationed herself near the food table, where she remained for the entirety of the afternoon. The harbor families came. The new families who had moved to the town in the years since came. Children who had no memory of the original kitchen came because their grandparents brought them, and grandparents who remembered everything stood in the doorway for a moment before walking in, the way you pause at the entrance of somewhere that has been important to you. Emma stood at the long counter and served. That was all she wanted to do. Not speak, not receive thanks, not be the center of the afternoon. Just stand at the counter and hand people food, the way she had done as a child, the way her grandmother had done for 20 years before her. Sophia was beside her. They had been doing this together for an hour before either of them mentioned it. "You're good at this," Sophia said. "You're better," Emma replied. "You give bigger portions. I spent 7 years in foster care. I have a different relationship with portion sizes." Emma laughed, the real laugh, the one that filled rooms, and Sophia smiled. And a woman collecting soup nearby looked at the two of them and smiled too without entirely knowing why. Luca found Emma at the end of the afternoon. The crowd had thinned. The light had gone gold and low over the water, the way it did in Porto Vela at that hour, throwing long shadows across the stone floor through the wide kitchen window. Emma was wiping down the counter. The same counter, the same window, the same quality of light that had been there when a thin boy came through the back and took the smallest loaf from the shelf. He stood in the doorway. She looked up. "You're going to say something," she said. "You have the face." "What face?" "The face you make when you've decided something and you're checking whether you still mean it." She set down the cloth. "Do you still mean it?" "Yes," he said, simply and without preamble, the way he said the things that actually mattered. He crossed the kitchen, this small, warm, salt-smelling room that had fed his family when nothing else would, and stood in front of her. He did not have a ring. That was deliberate. He had thought about the ring, had been to a jeweler twice, and both times had left without buying anything, because it had felt wrong to put something cold and formal between them. Emma was not a formal gesture. She was the least formal person he had ever met, and it was among the things he loved most about her. He simply took her hands in both of his. "You fed a hungry boy once," he said quietly. "You didn't know him. You didn't ask anything from him. You just left the door open." A pause. I have been trying to find a way to deserve that for 15 years without knowing that's what I was doing. Emma's eyes were bright. She didn't look away. I don't want to find someone to stand next to at formal events, he continued. I don't want someone who fits a requirement or completes a picture. I want the person who tells me I'm wrong when I'm wrong and is right about it. I want the person who finds missing sisters and talks to archive contacts and knows that 12-year-olds are capable of quite a lot when they have a... His voice dropped. I want you, Emma. All of it, every ordinary, extraordinary part. The kitchen was quiet around them. Outside, the sea moved against the harbor wall the way it always had. Emma looked at him for a long moment. This man who had walked into her life as a stranger and turned out to be the oldest story she knew, and felt something settle in her that had been in motion for a very long time. You should know, she said, that I'm still going to argue with you about things. I'm counting on it. And I'll probably always take Carmela's side in a disagreement that is genuinely concerning, he said. But yes, she laughed, and then she said yes too. From across the room, where she had been pretending to rearrange the bread table for the past 4 minutes, Sophia turned away and smiled at the wall and did not say a single word, because for once in her life she understood that the best thing she could do was nothing at all. Carmela, who had seen everything from her permanent position near the food table, simply nodded once, with the satisfaction of a woman who had always known exactly how this would end.